Go ahead and get started. Good evening. I'm Chelsea Swanson, project planner with the Public Works Department. And joining me tonight is Derek Bailey, principal traffic engineer, and Jessica Grant, supervising transportation planner, and Erica Madrigal will be providing Spanish translation. Tonight we'll be discussing concept designs for improvements to walking and biking facilities in the vicinity of the Castillo Street undercrossing. We'll go over the presentation first, and then at the end of the presentation, you may use the Q&A feature to ask questions or make comments. And you're also welcome to raise your hand if you'd like to speak. Interpretation is available, and you can select the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen. Interpretación disponible en español. Elija su idioma preferido. Why are we here tonight? We've heard from the community through the development of the city's pedestrian master plan and also the bicycle master plan update that biking and walking does not feel safe or comfortable at the Castillo Street undercrossing, where Castillo goes under Highway 101, and also leading up to the undercrossing on Castillo and Haley Streets. Castillo Street is also a Vision Zero priority corridor, or an area where serious injuries or fatal collisions occur in a consistent pattern. Therefore, this corridor is identified in our planning documents as an area that needs safety improvements for walking and biking facilities. So the city received grant funding to develop preliminary design concepts for these safety improvements, and that's why we're here tonight, to receive feedback from the community. So demonstrating the need for enhanced bike facilities in the Castillo Street undercrossing. These photos are taken on Castillo Street, south of the freeway, and where the bike lane ends and cyclists are forced to ride in the lane with traffic while going uphill. This is one of the locations where enhanced facilities are proposed. And this graphic shows existing bike facilities where the solid arrows are, and future planned bike facilities where the dashed arrows are. And you can see where there are gaps in the connectivity on Haley Street and also on Castillo Street. This graphic more clearly shows the gaps in the bike network shown in red. And the potential solutions include on eastbound Haley, a class 2 bike lane going towards downtown. On Castillo Street, north of the undercrossing, a class 2 lane in the uphill direction and a short class 3 lane in the downhill direction. And then on Castillo Street, between the undercrossing and Montecito Street, an in-street class 2 bike lane that would turn into a raised protected bike lane close to Montecito Street, and a class 3 shared lane in the downhill direction. And we'll go into more details in just a few minutes on these improvements. So with regard to sidewalk conditions in the area, the photo you see on the left is on Castillo Street, and it's a narrow sidewalk, 5 feet wide, right next to a wall and busy traffic. It's not the ideal condition for pedestrians. The image you see on the right is taken on Carrillo Street. It's a recent project we did where the wall was pulled back to create a wider sidewalk corridor, 10 feet total, and street trees were added in to provide a nice buffer for pedestrians adjacent to the sidewalk. That is the ideal type of sidewalk corridor we'd be going for with this project. And again, this slide shows on the left, that's Haley Street, where there's a 5 foot wide narrow sidewalk with no parkway, right adjacent to the traffic. And on the right is, again, an ideal sidewalk corridor with a 6 foot wide sidewalk and about 4 foot wide tree wells. And this graphic's taken from the city's pedestrian master plan, and again, just is another demonstration of an ideal sidewalk corridor width for roads that have a 60 foot right of way or greater. The frontage zone shown here is typically on private property, so the portions in the right of way would be the 6-foot sidewalk and the 4-foot wide parkway. This graphic shows locations in the yellow areas where there's potential for sidewalk widening as part of this project. At these locations, the sidewalk could be separated from street traffic by a parkway and street trees. But there's several conflicts to note that we just looked at in those photos. On Haley Street, just east of Castillo, widening the sidewalk and planting street trees would require the removal of those palm trees. On Castillo, between the Undercrossing and Montecito Street, widening the sidewalk in these areas would require some property acquisition. What you'll notice in this graphic as well, the actual undercrossing of the 101 is not an area that we are looking to widen, and Derek will get into the details of that. So I'm going to hand it over to Derek to get into the project details.
Thanks, Chelsea, and good evening, everyone. Again, my name is Derek Bailey. I'm a traffic engineer with the city. Yeah, so what we're looking at is opportunities to connect some of the missing gaps in the bike network and improve the sidewalk network in the vicinity of the undercrossing. Unfortunately, and we know the undercrossing of both the train bridge and underneath the freeway is not the most pleasant place to walk or bike, to put it mildly. But that is a much bigger project in order to take that on. It's a really complex project. There's a high water table. The overhead clearances under the train bridge and the freeway are currently substandard. So if anything were to be replaced, it would either need to go deeper or up over top. The northbound on-ramp onto the freeway is substandard. There's just a whole lot of things that are substandard. And point I'm getting to is in order to widen the sidewalks, widen the bike lanes, and just make the interchange more comfortable for all road users, it would require a complete interchange replacement. And we don't even know what that would cost. It's probably somewhere in the $50 to $100 million range, possibly even more. And unfortunately, there is not that kind of funding available right now. So what we're focusing on is just the approaches on either side of the undercrossing to make it as comfortable and as safe as possible. That interchange area is owned and operated by Caltrans presently. So that is something that when the time comes, we will love to work with Caltrans on replacing that interchange. Just checking my notes. Thank you. So now I'm going to walk through slide by slide some of our ideas for improving the conditions on either side of the undercrossing. What you're looking at right now is the Castillo Montecito Street intersection, and Castillo Street is running sideways and Montecito Street is running up and down. The beach, just to orient you, is towards the right and the freeway is towards the left. And so just a few features I'd like to point out to you. We'll start on the left-hand side of the screen. Chelsea, if you wouldn't mind hovering your cursor over there, just over the raised bike lane. So you notice there's a green stripe there. Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. That's a raised bike lane. So what that means is the bike lane is at sidewalk level. So it's separated by a curb from the traffic lane. We think that's important because that southbound right turn movement to go up the hill towards City College is really busy. And to have cyclists mixing in the street right there with that heavy right turning traffic, we just don't think it can be done safely. So through a raised bike lane that would take cyclists up to the intersection, and then there would be a dedicated traffic signal phase to take them across the intersection. And then the bike lane, we would reconfigure that south of the intersection so that the bike lane would start right at the intersection. Currently, it kind of starts at the south end of the gas station. So there'd be a nice continuous bike facility all the way down to the beach. In the northbound direction, there just isn't enough room to provide a bike lane in both directions. We think the uphill direction is the more important direction because of that heavy right turn lane, and just because cyclists, they have a harder time going uphill. So it's there's more speed differential between cyclists and traffic. In the downhill direction, it's a lot easier for cyclists to keep up with traffic. In the downhill direction going north towards the freeway, cyclists would share the lane with traffic. As far as some of the sidewalk widening opportunities, you can see kind of in the gray shaded areas. Yeah, thank you. That's some of the opportunities. That's one location though, right there where Chelsea's hovering the cursor over, where there would be some property acquisition required in order to fully widen that sidewalk to 10 feet and provide street trees and lighting. We could fit lighting in without property acquisition, but in order to get street trees and a nice wide sidewalk, that would require some property acquisition right there. One other thing to point out on this diagram, and it's kind of on the bottom of the screen, is the future Cliff Drive multi-use path. And so from Castillo Street along the south side of Montecito Street, all the way up the hill past City College and all the way out to the roundabout is a planned bike path. So it would tie into this intersection. So this is going to be a very important connection in our bike network someday. So that's one of the reasons why we're looking at this. If you want to go to the next slide, we'll move up Castillo Street towards the freeway. We'll start southbound again, kind of near the train bridge, if you don't mind. So southbound direction. So as you're coming from under the train bridge going towards the beach, there'll be a dedicated in-street bike lane right there. And about halfway across the image there, that's where it turns into a raised bike lane. That's where that right turn lane begins. So that's what the bike condition would look like. Again, in the downhill direction going towards the freeway, it would be bikes would have to take the lane. Once it gets to about the train bridge, there is enough room to begin a dedicated bike lane. But again, between Montecito Street to about the train bridge, cyclists would have to share the lane. And again, we show widened sidewalk and street trees through this area. One thing we're not sure yet is just with the water table in that area. I think everybody knows that the water table is somewhat high in that area, whether or not trees could survive in that. So that's something we're going to have to investigate further. But if we keep going up the corridor and look at the interchange and the north side of the interchange. Yeah. So there's a lot going on here, and we are going to have these images on our website, and we hope that you'll take the time just to hop on and inspect them a little bit more closely, but I'll try to walk you through them as best I can. We'll start again, maybe southbound. We'll start on Castillo Street, kind of over on the left-hand side of the screen. So that's right near the DMV. So as you're coming down Castillo Street next to the DMV, there's a bike lane. We would add buffers to that bike lane on that particular block of Castillo Street. The lane configuration there's proposed to change. So right now, both traffic lanes can go south on Castillo Street. We're proposing to change that so that one lane would turn left to go towards downtown and the other lane would go straight. And then as you go across that on-ramp intersection, the one traffic lane would feed into the inside, the number 1 lane, and the bikes would feed into the number 2 lane, where they would have to take the lane for a short distance before the bike lane begins around that corner. We think that will actually work pretty well, just the way the traffic signal sequence is out there. Cyclists should have a pretty smooth shot through that section, even though they do have to take the lane. In the other direction, going northbound as you're under the freeway, once you start climbing up out of the freeway, cyclists will have 2 options. One is to hop onto a raised bike lane to go towards Haley Street in downtown, right there. So that's going to require reconfiguring that right turn traffic lane to go on to Haley Street, but that will be a really comfortable connection for cyclists. We can also widen the sidewalk in that area. It forces vehicles to make more of a turn right there instead of being a straight shot from Castillo Street right up onto Haley. The other option for cyclists, if they want to go up Castillo Street, they would just follow those skip lines, and then that bike lane will feed right into Castillo Street. And that'd be a really good way to get to Bath Street if somebody wants to go north towards Cottage Hospital. And just for sidewalk facilities on this page, there are a few sidewalk widening opportunities. The one is next to that right turn lane that goes from Castillo Street onto Haley that goes into downtown. It's kind of a narrow sidewalk right now, and it's what we call a curb face sidewalk. So the sidewalk is right up against the curb next to traffic. On the other side of the street, we can, yeah, and that's where those palm trees are. So again, there is space there. The city owns right of way where the sidewalk could be widened and street trees planted. But again, the trade-off there would be those nice palm trees. So that's something we're interested to hear from the community. Which would be a preference, you know, maintain those existing trees or the wider sidewalk with the street trees. And then on the DMV corner of Castillo Street, there's a short section there between the DMV down to the corner where the sidewalk really narrows down, and it could be rebuilt, widened, and a couple street trees added. So lots of good opportunities to improve the walking environment. And throughout the project area, we think it would benefit from better lighting too, just because parts of this area can get quite dark at night and it is heavily used. Next slide. Okay, so now we're looking at Haley Street, and we've kind of changed our orientation. The on-ramp is on the left, and going towards downtown is on the right, and towards the beach on Castillo Street would be going down at the bottom of the page. So again, we talked about that raised bike lane on from Castillo onto eastbound Haley. So once it turns the corner, it would drop down into the street and would just become a regular bike lane. And the thing to point out in this area that would have to change if this particular alternative were implemented is we would have to change the lane configuration on Haley Street, just immediately west of Bath. Currently, there's 2 lanes that go towards the freeway before it opens up to those left turn pockets. There would only be room for 1 lane just for a short distance, and then it would open up to the left turn pockets. This wouldn't affect the capacity at the Castillo Street intersection, but it would affect the capacity at the Haley and Bath Street intersection. We're going to talk about that in just a moment. Go to the next slide. And so if we keep going east on Haley Street, this is the block between Bath Street and De La Vina. There's actually 2 options that we could possibly do on this block. What you're seeing here is a raised bike lane. And so the bike lane would be raised up again at sidewalk level, and it would be between the parked cars and the sidewalk. And we'll show you a cross section in just a moment. One other thing to point out on this screen is the parking. So in order to fit in a bike lane, we're going to have to rearrange the parkway, the parking, and the street trees so that the street trees and the parking would alternate. And if you can go to the next slide and we can look at that cross section. So this would be looking towards downtown on Haley Street. The left-hand side of the street, that's the north side of the street, it wouldn't change at all. So there would still be sidewalk, parkway that's existing, street parking along the north side, and then the east and west traffic lanes. On the south side of the road, where you can see that the car is kind of sitting on top of the tree right there, that's just illustrating that the parking and the trees are going to have some kind of alternate. And then you can see the bike lane in between the parking and the sidewalk. And this would definitely be a more expensive of the 2 options. So if we go to the next slide. So this shows an in-street bike lane. And again, in order to get room to create an in-street bike lane, we would have to recess the parking into the parkway and have like an alternating parking street tree configuration, but that would create enough room for a bike lane in the street. And again, this would be the less expensive of the 2 options. And then that bike lane will feed east of De La Vina Street, where there is already a planned bike lane, and that'll continue all the way towards Milpas and the east side. And if we go to the next slide, we can look at the cross section. Again, you can just see how the bike lane is in the street instead of between the parking and the sidewalk. And again, the vehicle that's right on top of that tree on the right-hand side, that just illustrates that the parking and the trees will alternate. And next slide. Okay, so going back to the discussion of how the capacity at the Haley Street and Bath Street intersection would be affected. If we look at that area just immediately west of the intersection, again, you can see the existing lane configuration on the right-hand side of the screen. There's one lane going towards downtown, kind of pointing up and to the right. Then there's a left turn lane that goes up Bath Street. And then there's two lanes going towards the freeway. So that's existing. So if you go to the next slide. In order to fit in a bike lane, there's two alternatives that we evaluated. One was to have the bike lane in the street, but the other is what if we had the bike lane in the parkway area? And that way the street wouldn't be affected at all. The things that we looked at in that parkway area, there's an existing tree, there's utilities, and there's lighting. So this would be quite an expensive alternative, if it's even feasible at all. We're not even sure at this point whether or not those utilities can even be relocated. So we did look at the other option, which is a restriping option. You can go to the next slide. So on the left, again, that just shows the existing lane configuration, but that red arrow, you can see that just shows that the one lane would go away. And then as you go towards the freeway, it would open up to two lanes. On the right-hand side, that just shows that there would be a bike lane, and the traffic lanes would just shift over slightly towards the north side curb. But in order to reduce the lanes going westbound from the intersection, that has implications too that we'll look at in the next slide. Great, so that zooms in on the intersection itself. So again, on the west of the intersection going towards the freeway, there would just be one lane immediately west of the intersection. We call that an accepting lane. So that's the side of the intersection that accepts the traffic. On the other side of the intersection on Haley Street, there's currently two lanes feeding into it. So one of those lanes would have to go away because there would only be one accepting lane on the other side of the intersection. So that would slightly reduce the capacity of the intersection. It's not, that second lane is not very long, so it doesn't add a significant amount of capacity to the intersection, but it's also a good place to pass in case somebody's turning left to go down Bath Street. In order to offset that loss of capacity, what we looked at is turning Bath Street into potentially a one-way street for a portion of it. So instead of being a two-way street immediately south of Haley, what if it was a one-way street? One lane would be a dedicated left turn lane to go towards the on-ramp and City College. That's a really heavy movement. And then there would be one lane to go straight up Bath Street. Next slide. So how would Bath Street be accessed then if one could not turn down Bath Street from Haley? And these dashed lines just kind of illustrate that either through the alley or via Cottage Grove or even the 101 off ramp would be how traffic would access that area. We had a specific meeting on this last Thursday, a webinar. If you weren't able to attend, we've got that available on our website, and we dig into a little bit more detail on this and just some of the traffic performance. Traffic performance is actually improved because there's two lanes on Bath Street, and there's actually a need for capacity on Bath Street. But there is some access trade-offs as we're looking at right here. And we look at some of the traffic volumes and delay associated with that. So if you have time and you'd like to check that out on our website, that would be excellent. Next slide. And I'll turn it back to Chelsea, and she'll just talk some of the next steps.
Thank you, Derek. Okay, so the next steps for this project and this planning process, we're going to meet in person this Saturday, the 8th. We'll be at the Haley and De La Vina Bridge on the sidewalk. We'll have some tables set up. You won't be able to miss us. And we'll be there from 10 to noon. We're going to go over the same information that we went over tonight. And there won't be a formal presentation, so you can stop by anytime and check out the plans in more detail and ask questions. And then on October 27th, we'll take the project before the Transportation Circulation Committee. That's a public meeting that will be in the evening. It's also in person, open to the public, and it'll be at 630 Garden Street. And then we're going to gather the feedback from these public meetings, analyze it, and refine the project accordingly. And then if there are still details or input we need from the public, we may have additional public meetings in the next few months. And then lastly, the goal of this outreach effort is to have a community supported project that would be ready for going out for grant funding in 2023 or 2024 for a final design and construction. And if grant funding is received in 2024, we would return to the community. Actually, we'd probably return to the community closer to the grant application. And then if we're successful, we would again go out to the community with an update on the project and get more feedback. And then if we were moving on to construction, it would be around 2027, 2028. So just to wrap it up, and we look forward to your feedback in just a second, and a few items again to let us know your thoughts on the sidewalk widening option on 300 West block of Haley Street. That would require the removal of those palm trees, and new street trees would be added in, whether you think that's a good idea or not in this location. If there's any other sections of sidewalk on Castillo or Haley that you'd like us to focus on, that bottom photo of Derek holding the tape measure shows the potential for how the sidewalk could be widened within that area to 10 feet. And then again, we'd like to hear your feedback as well on the two options for the bike lanes on the 200 block of West Haley that Derek went over, the on-street bike lane versus the raised bike lane that would be on the inside of the parking. So that concludes our presentation. We'll get into the Q&A with Jessica in just a second. You're welcome to email me at that email address right there. And I do encourage you to go to the project webpage where you can subscribe and you'll receive any updates anytime we post anything, any plans, or if there's anything happening about the project, you'll get notified. The plans and tonight's webinar that is being recorded should be up on the page early next week. And we'll also have the webinar from the Bath Street changes that Derek mentioned that we did last week up on the page by next week. So with that, we'll go to the Q&A and take it away, Jessica.
All right. Good evening, everyone. I will be moderating a couple ways that you could participate is to type in a question or some of your feedback, or we can also unmute you as well. I already see a couple written comments come in, and I believe there is one hand raised. So let's get started with the first written questions that came in. First one was, were roundabouts considered at all these intersections, especially the Castillo-Haley triangle?
Thanks, Jessica. I'll take that one. We actually looked at that 5 or 6 years ago or so. Not in very much detail, though. There's actually not as much room there as one would think, and the angles at which the streets come in, it wouldn't function particularly well. We don't think we could get it to work there, even though it seems like there's a lot of room. You'd be surprised how large roundabouts are. For example, Haley Street is, kind of between 40 and 46 feet wide in this area. a single lane roundabout, like for example, at Cliff Drive and Las Positas, they're usually close to 110 feet across. So if you just look at the width of Haley Street right there and go over double it, that would be the width of just the circulatory roadway, not even including the parkways or the sidewalks on the outside of that. So yeah, unfortunately, we don't think it would fit here. And the footprint of the Castillo Montecito intersection is even smaller, so it wouldn't fit there either. But we do like roundabouts, and in the right conditions, it is a really elegant solution.
Thanks, Derek. The next question is, can we implement speed level to 25 miles per hour under the bridge at Castillo? And if there can add any, I'm sorry, let's see, let me see if I'm reading this correctly. And if we can add Castillo crossing light traffic under bridge. Not sure if I interpreted that question. First is the speed, and I think if they could clarify that, type in another additional clarification for the Castillo crossing light.
Can we go back to that question, Jessica? I need to look up what the existing speed limit is under there.
Sure, sure. Yes, we'll go back to that one. Then the next one was we have concrete steps going onto Castillo from our property. If you said that will be cut into the properties, and then I assume we would rebuild. Okay, yes. So if do we have a photo of that we could go to?
I believe.
Yeah, that's probably the best image we have. You know, we didn't go to the level of detail of showing how the stairs would be rebuilt, but what might end up happening is there might actually be a bit of a ramp built up parallel with the sidewalk that would rise up to the property. But yeah, at this point, we are planning to maintain access. We just don't know if it would be stairs or a ramp to do that.
All right. The next question is, were fence barriers considered for the bike lane under the underpass?
Good question. And from a cyclist's comfort perspective, they would be very beneficial. Again, this area immediately under the underpass is Caltrans jurisdiction, and there isn't enough room between the traffic lane and the bike lane. Like, there would need to be, in order for Caltrans to approve it, there would probably need to be about a 3-foot buffer between the bike lane and the traffic lane in order to have some kind of vertical element. And as you know, there's just a thin white line that separates the traffic lane from the bike lane under the underpass, just because there isn't enough space. So that's unfortunately what we're stuck with.
And then the follow-up is on what will happen to the disappearing part of the bike lane just after going under the underpass? So the downhill side, if you can describe that, Derek.
Which direction? Northbound
it
or
was
southbound?
on the downhill side. So I think it was about being in a shared lane, and then you actually go into the bike lane under the underpass.
Okay, maybe we'll do both directions again, sure, just to cover our bases. So if we're starting near the DMV in a bike lane and on Castillo Street, and we're going down towards the beach, we would get to that traffic signal where the on-ramp is. The bikes would go across the intersection into what we call the number 2 lane, the second lane away from the center of the road. The vehicles would go into the number 1 lane. So they would go to that inside lane. And then for a short distance around that bend where there just isn't enough room for a bike lane, bikes would take the lane, and then they would feed into that bike lane area that's under the bridge. And then if we want to go back to that first image 2 slides earlier. Great, and we'll start on the very right-hand side of the screen. So that's the bike lane coming up from the beach. That bike lane will end just before it gets to the 7-Eleven, and cyclists will have to take the lane, that curb lane. One thing to point out here, I should have pointed out earlier, there's that vacant property on the northeast corner. Whether it's with potentially with this project that we're looking at as a city project, or if that develops by then, that curb alignment is going to be straightened out. As you know, that current curb alignment is kind of a holdover from when there used to be a gas station there. So we're proposing to straighten that out, and the sidewalk will be widened to a full 10 feet in front of that property. So that, again, will provide kind of straighten out the curb alignment. So there's a straight alignment for that lane going across the intersection towards downtown. And again, the bikes would stay in the curb lane till they get closer to the freeway. And then once they get closer to the freeway under the train bridge, the road starts to get a little bit wider, and there is enough room for a bike lane just immediately under the train bridge. And again, I know this is a lot to absorb. We'll have these diagrams on our website if you want to look at it and just spend a little bit more time poring over them.
Great. Derek, were you ready to discuss the speed?
Oh,
limit?
yes. So the speed limit on Castillo Street from Cabrillo all the way up to Cottage Hospital is 25 miles an hour. That's the speed limit, and fully acknowledge that the operating speeds under the underpass, people do gain a little bit of speed there. So that becomes more of an enforcement issue. You know, we've established what the safe operating speed is at 25 miles per hour. But as far as the operating speeds go, that I understand that is another issue.
Okay. Great. The next question is there a bike lane surface that would keep bike tires dry from the groundwater seepage?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. The next one is just a general comment, and it was the comment is about the sidewalk on the genealogical side where the library is, and it says there appears to be very little benefit to widening the sidewalk to 10 feet on the east side of Castillo between Montecito and the driveway entrance to the genealogical library. The current sidewalk is 8 feet, and the amount of foot traffic in that area is small. The cost of construction and land acquisition in that area does not provide significant benefits. Widening the sidewalk between the driveway and the railroad bridge makes perfect sense with little impacts.
Yeah, thanks for the comment. Good comment. We appreciate that. One thing to consider with the difference between an 8-foot wide sidewalk and a 10-foot wide sidewalk is also the type of street trees that we'd be able to fit in that area. With the 8-foot wide sidewalk, we'd probably be looking at replacing the palm trees that are in that area. There's some small tree wells. That's the kind of tree that can fit in a narrower sidewalk, whereas for example, on Carrillo Street, the project that was just finished, we could fit in jacaranda trees or some kind of leafy tree. So that is also another difference between 8 feet and 10 feet, but good comment. Thank you.
There was just a follow-up comment. It had to do with the just protected barriers or buffers between the traffic and the bike lanes. Really going underneath the freeway, and again, is that something that the community could push Caltrans on I believe you mentioned that there was sort of the lack of real estate to allow that buffer. Yeah, what would be your advice for contacting Caltrans, or is it possible for a lane reduction to accommodate those buffers? What would be that?
I don't foresee a lane reduction being possible in this area just because it is so heavy with traffic. But we're going to be meeting with Caltrans again as we hopefully solidify some of the concepts that the community seems to be getting behind. And we can talk to them then about whether or not they'd be open to some kind of delineator along that white stripe. That would be like one of the vertical white flex posts. That would probably be all we could fit there. And again, I suspect they would not be open to it, but we'll definitely ask the question, and we can report back to everybody.
All right, I believe we've gone through the at least the written questions. I did see a hand raised from the Bernstein family, I believe. So if there was anything else, but I think I saw also typewritten questions from your family as well. So let me know if you would, or type if you'd like to be unmuted for a comment. And if there's anybody else that has any questions or
just while we're waiting, Jessica, on Saturday at our meeting, we are going to have full-size strip maps out that will be a lot easier to read. So again, if you're struggling with understanding these, we'd love it if you'd stop by and see us on Saturday. And if not, again, they'll be on our website next week.
Okay, well, I am going to go ahead and unmute the caller for the Bernstein family. You were unmuted, so go ahead and.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, a few points. First, I wanted to, normally I don't disclose my location, but it's relevant to this discussion. I live at the corner of Montecito and Castillo, and I have since 2004. I am really familiar with the traffic patterns, and especially the bike traffic. I'm a bicyclist myself. And a few comments on this. That underpass under the underpass is so incredibly dangerous. I have seen with my own eyes frequent collisions between bicyclists and cars, and especially under that bridge. And honestly, it's not going to be safe with just simply another color of paint. There really needs to be some type of fence or some type of curb, because for one, this is a tourist area, people aren't looking for bicycles. You've got a lot of people, you know, with the hotels and all, they're not looking for that. Second of all, you've got a lot of SBCC students who are riding through here. And unfortunately, a lot of them are not wearing helmets. And this is really, I mean, their lives are at stake. I've had a lot of close calls myself. I wear a helmet. And in fact, even though this, I mean, I can literally see this, this intersection from my window, I won't ride there. I will go way out of my way to avoid this because it is so absolutely dangerous. And I hear you when you're saying Caltrans might not go for a fence barrier, but I think of all of these options, I think that is the one critical thing that really should be put into place, even if it's a tiny curb, just something that would help prevent a car if it starts veering. Well, it's not if, it's every time, every day I see cars driving in the bicycle lane, and it's flat out scary to see this on a daily basis. So I really hope that's one comment. I think your ideas for the raised bike paths are fantastic. I'm really grateful that you're taking this seriously and really looking into expanding this, especially this SBCC corridor from the on the Chevron side where the gas station is on the corner of Montecito and Castillo, that's definitely needed. But yeah, the bike lane, especially since the pandemic has begun, the bike traffic has increased a lot. And so honestly, beyond when you're going on the uphill side and going into Haley, the less if you can swing a curb or a fence into one of those lanes, then the cheaper option would probably be better. Allowing the bicycles to be on the streets. It's just that in that area, the cars are not respecting the bicyclists at all. And also on the downhill side, the bike lane, there's a part where it absolutely disappears for a bit. And there's really no place for a bicyclist to go that's in a bike lane. It's really right into the traffic. So there really needs to be some sort of physical separation. Cars do not respect it. They won't. And they don't respect the line on there. You asked about the trees, and I'm personally fine with, I'm a big tree lover and I don't like chopping down trees, but because this is such a dangerous corridor, I think it's justified to widen up near the DMV areas in that the upper portion of that intersection up by that gorgeous red flowered tree that you have on the screen. I also agree with the comment with where there's not on the side by the Genealogical Society, there's not a lot of pedestrian traffic there. There's a lot of bicycle traffic. And I don't know if there's a way to make a little more space with that sidewalk for the bicycles, or barring anything, giving some level of a barrier. I think even if it's a tiny curb, that if you did nothing else, that would drastically improve the safety under that underpass. Immensely. You have no idea what I've seen. It's scary. I think that was, the last comment I'd like to make is just in general, when you're thinking of these plans, and is that if you're considering a bike path that's going next to parked cars, I see this also on Bath and on Upper State. Cars, parked cars, the doors, when they open, if there's a person in that car, those doors are opening into the bike lane. And I've seen bicycles collide with car doors because there's not an allowance between the bike lane and where the parked car is. So I just invite you to consider allowing just a little bit more space, because people just aren't trained to do the Dutch reach where they're turning around and looking for an oncoming bicyclist. They just open the door, and it's what I find as a bicyclist is just assuming a car door will open because it happens so often that I'm wandering out of the bike lane into the driving with all the cars, because these parked cars keep opening the car doors into the lane, and it's equally dangerous. So I hope you'll consider, I know it's another problem to solve, but I hope that as you're designing and improving the bike lanes here in Santa Barbara, that you'll keep that parked car scenario and doors opening into the bike lane. I hope you'll keep that in your mind. Thank you for hearing us.
Angela, I thank you. I appreciate the feedback. Since we're on the image right now, that was the two options for on Haley Street, where it would be one where you would bike lane next to parked vehicles. But Chelsea, if you could go to that other image, the other scenario would be citing the bike lane adjacent to the sidewalk, where the cyclists are not next to the parked cars. What were your thoughts on that, Angela?
So I understand that this is all a big balancing act. So obviously the ideal would be the image you're showing now, where it's not, the bicyclist is not in danger of having to, navigate all these vehicles that aren't going to respect a bicyclist space. But if you know, given the costs and the complications of removing the light fixtures, et cetera, honestly, I think a good backup plan would be to have that lane in with the traffic, provided that there is a barrier in that one little curve going into Haley, because that's also dodgy. So like on the underpass and then that curve as it approaches into Haley, having a lane for the bicycles and a lane for the cars, I think is a reasonable plan. But I only would say it would be reasonable as long as there is a barrier, just because of the traffic patterns and because people are just really either unaware or they don't care about the fact that there are so many bicyclists around.
Thank you, Angela. I appreciate it. I'm going to go ahead to a couple of other questions we received. And one of them is a concern, I think, with widening of walkways and unhoused individuals. So it was, if walkways will be widened, which is good, but it also is an attraction for unhoused people as a potential hangout. That is already blocking this passage. And what would we see to sort of prevent that?
Thanks, Jessica. We haven't had an issue with the sidewalk on Carrillo Street, which I kind of like in this one too, just as far as proximity to the freeway. Where we tend to see more problems with blocking the sidewalk tends to be under structures, under bridges and whatnot. The sidewalk under the bridge is very narrow, and it unfortunately, like I mentioned, the bridge abutments on either side are not getting any wider, so that sidewalk's not getting any wider. So I wouldn't expect it would be an issue. One thing that we've had a few conversations with the Genealogical Society. We met with them a few weeks ago. One thing they pointed out is kind of behind those orange retaining walls, kind of up more towards the property line fences. There's a level area up there where it's easy to access and easy to hang out. And one thing we could do that Caltrans has actually done on a few of the other underpasses around town is they've just put a slope all the way back from the retaining wall back to the fence line. So it's not a comfortable place or a level place that one could set up. So that's something we're already looking at. But it is a good point about the wider sidewalk, and let us chew on that one for a little bit.
Hey, the next one is, it's more of just a comment, and the comment is, we are homeowners who live on Castillo and bike the Castillo underpass often because it is the most direct way to the beach. My sons and their teenage friends bike this path to the beach often. We support making it as safe as possible for bicyclists and pedestrians. Love the raised sidewalks and protected bike lanes. Thank you for that comment. The next one is, let's see. Oh, okay. Shifting the curved part of Castillo near the freeway on-ramp to the north by taking up more of the sidewalk and on the north side would also increase the arc length of the curb. Coupled with the bright yellow curb separating the bike lane from the car, I would expect cars to slow down even more. Do you want me to read that one?
No, I think I understand. So Chelsea, the office building on the northeast corner of Haley and Castillo. You can hover over that. Yeah, so it would be kind of shifting Castillo Street a little bit towards the that office building would kind of smooth out that curb south of the intersection. It might provide a little bit extra room to provide some kind of separation. Yeah, that is possible. We can look at that and see what kind of space we could possibly gain out of that. The trade-off, if I understand your comment correctly, the trade-off with that would be that we would lose some of the opportunity to widen the sidewalk in front of that office building. But yeah, we could potentially gain some space that might make the cycling experience safer and more pleasant. So yeah, we'll look at that. Thank you.
Okay, that was it of the questions at this time. And again, we encourage you to come on Saturday, and please tell your friends and neighbors about this. And yeah, it's really good just to sort of see, we have the whole entire route plotted out, so it's a little bit easier. It's a harder sometimes on these webinars is that they break it up in sections. So it's just one way to yeah, kind of experience what the entire route or proposed changes would include. I did get one more follow-up from the same person that asked the question. They said they were referring to the bike path on the west side of the on-ramp. Would you like me to maybe unmute so we understand?
Yeah, I misunderstood the
Yeah.
comment then. Yeah, that would be helpful if Terry's available to
Yes.
make that comment.
Terry, if it's okay, we could, I'll unmute you, and if you could just explain it in a little bit more detail for us.
Hey, can you hear me?
Mhm.
Yeah, so I was talking about the basically right dead center of the image we're looking at. Basically on the part where a car on the rightmost lane going towards the waterfront would tend to cut the bike lane. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, the other person who was speaking was referring to, or what I was envisioning was cutting into some of the sidewalk on the north side of this image. If you go to the triangle, like the triangular part of it, like shifting that bit over and then giving more room for a bike lane on the inside, and in addition to putting like a bright yellow curb to separate the bike lane from the traffic lane. So I guess there isn't a bike lane right now. And from the illustration, it looks like that section would be a shared bike and car lane. Is that right?
Yeah, that's accurate. We struggled with this area, you know, what even if there was enough room for even a striped bike lane, this corner is rather tight. And if you can think of the worst case scenario where there's a bike in a bike lane and then a semi in the in that lane next to it, that semi is so long as it's driving through that arc, part of that, the middle part of that semi would actually encroach right into the bike lane. So barring like a lot more space, I don't even know if we can make this safe with a separate bike lane in this area. I don't know if we'd want a separate bike lane.
Okay, that makes sense.
Might actually be safest for cyclists to take the lane. But yeah, your comment about shifting the triangle kind of towards the downtown direction makes sense as far as creating more space. We'll play with that and see how much space we can get. But that whole concept of just the tightness of the curve and a vehicle next to a bike facility, whatever it might look like, was something we were struggling with.
Okay. Am I still on?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. In that case, I'll ask another question. So was it the option of just making it effectively one lane each way with like queuing lanes for like the left and right turn traffic going onto 101 southbound? Is that because when I'm going through there, it seems like it's de facto one lane each way because there's almost always a queue of some kind.
Yeah, it's kind of a lane balancing exercise as well, where you need lanes feeding into intersections and what kind of accepting lanes you need on the far side of intersections.
Mhm.
So one of the major movements that feeds into the underpass as far as going towards the beach is on Haley Street. So if you're going on Haley towards the freeway, there's 2 left turn lanes, because that's a very heavy left turn movement. And so there has to be 2 accepting lanes on the departure side of the intersection. And there just wouldn't be enough room to merge those 2 left turn lanes together under the bridge. Makes sense what you're saying about the, because there is not a dedicated left turn once you're under the bridge to get onto the southbound on-ramp. But as far as that, the need to accept those 2 dual left turn lanes, that's really what's driving that. If it wasn't for that heavy left turn movement, yeah, we could start off with 1 lane feeding out of that intersection and carry it all the way through.
Okay. And then you might even have room for a dedicated bike lane, but
Yep.
Okay, it is what it is.
Yeah.
Cool, thank you.
Thank you, Terry. All right, well, that concludes the questions. Chelsea, if you could just go to the prompt for email contacts and
Sure.
that might have a question later on how to reach our team.
Jessica, did one other question pop up in the Q&A, or was that already answered?
It was already.
Got it. Okay.
All right.
Any other hands raised, or are we?
No, I think that is it. So yes, you can wrap us up, Chelsea, and we'll maybe see some of you on Saturday. And again, let your neighbors know, or and friends to come and chat with us.
Yeah, thanks everyone. We really appreciate your time and your feedback, and welcome more of it.